occupational adaptation now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how it has been reconceptualized. The objectives for this presentation, for this lecture, is you will learn to analyze and apply the occupational adaptation model and the concepts to occupational therapy practice. This also matches up with your course objectives, which are describe, discuss, and differentiate by outcomes between the most frequently used models in OT practice, compare, contrast, and apply the various models that best guide the practice of OT for persons, groups, and populations, associate a common intervention with each theoretical model of practice, and demonstrate professionalism through team assignments. Okay, this model was reconceptualized by Lennon Grayho, and he has presented it in a way that is easier to understand than what it was before. He is an assistant professor of rehab at the Columbia University Medical Center in the occupational therapy department. He's written several different papers on this model, so hopefully this will help you to grasp a better understanding of it. The construct of occupational adaptation comes from the philosophical base of OT back in 2017 that said participation in meaningful occupations is a determinant of health and leads to adaptation. And that came from Grayho and Boiselle and DeLoma in 2018. He did a scoping study on the construct of occupational adaptation, and there were 74 articles that actually described that construct. So Schade and Schultz cited occupational adaptation 74 times, and Kielhofner cited it 37 times. So I presented the model of human occupation first, and now I'm doing the occupational adaptation. And if you've watched the MOHO, you also heard a lot about adaptation in MOHO as well. And adaptation is seen as a positive, normal response to change. So it's not something that is a afterthought. Okay, so it is a product of engagement in occupations. It happens all the time. It is a transaction that happens within the environment, and it is a response to change and life transitions. Also, a formation of a desired sense of self. So these are the things that you can look when you're thinking about adaptation. This is how adaptation is defined in this model. The development of the model began at Texas Women's University, and it was a theoretical framework. It started out as a two-part seminal article in '92 by Jeanette Schade and Sally Schultz, and try to say that 10 times fast. It was used, some historical influences of the OA, that should be model, not mode. There's a typo there. The use of occupation to facilitate adaptation. So that went all the way back to Meyer in 1922. Riley said that the man's need to master the environment, that is a type of thought about adaptation. Flory, Lawrence, and White spoke of adaptation, occupation as a way to achieve competency, mastery, and motivation. And we've heard those terms before. Self-initiated occupation, Yerxa mentioned that. Competence, resilience, active doing, and choice. Many people in the OT field have said those words: Fiedler, Fine, Kielhofner, King, Kleinman, and Buckley, and Nelson. So why was it reconceptualized? Well, Grayho found that it was a very complex process with many layers originally, and it was hard to understand and to articulate, and even hard to describe. If you were talking to other therapists, sometimes it was hard to describe. I have taught it prior to learning the Grayho conceptualization of it, and it was hard to teach. So it's much easier to understand now. Um, and the good thing is that it did not change the way we look at OA, and it didn't change what OA, the model itself, it just changed the way to explain it. So, and to understand it. So it's definitely easier to apply now. This is what it looked like before, and this was in 92. And it's just a big concept map that you had to know where it started, so there's no pictures or anything. And then if you get on, well, so this is some of the terminology, and I'm going to show you another picture of it in just a second. But some of the terminology from this model is adaptive response system, adaptive response generation, adaptive response mechanisms, adaptation energy, primary and secondary, adaptive response modes, which are existing, modified, new, and then the adaptive response behaviors, adaptive response evaluation, and adaptive response integration. Then we have the OA constants, which are your person that has a desire for mastery, your environment, which gives you the demand for mastery, and then between the two, you have a press for mastery. So we'll talk about all of these words. So it sounds really confusing right now. And then each person has their own adaptation gestalt, or how they see it. So a lot of this terminology you can see is similar to what we talked about in the MOHO model as well. So this is the new and improved way to understand or to conceptualize the occupational adaptation process. So on the left, you have the person. And with the person, you have the person as an occupational being and with a desire for mastery. And within the person, you have cognitive, sensory motor, and psychosocial constructs. Then over here on the right, you have the environment. And in the environment, you have the occupational environment, is what they call it. And it is the physical, social, cultural, temporal, personal, and virtual contexts. And this creates a demand for mastery. So whatever they're needing to do here in one of these environments creates a demand for the person to do it. Okay, so when that happens, there is a interaction between the two, and you have what this person has automatically, which would be like the relative mastery here, okay, and with that they have the press for mastery. So between the two, person, environment, there is a press for mastery, and we'll go on and see some more of this. So if you kind of keep this in your mind, and again, let's think about you as a student. You're over here with your person with cognitive, sensory motor, psychosocial being, and you're wanting to be a student, and your environment provides you with the physical environment, which you're going to school, social environment, your friends, peers, teachers, cultural environment, you're needing to learn how to work within the culture of the university, time, working within the different time frames of what's going on now, your personal environment, how your home, where you're living, that type of thing. And then virtual context, you're also learning how to deal with getting online and doing things online and on time and that kind of thing. And so between yourself and these environments, there is a press. You are pressed to meet what it takes to get those things done. Okay, so now we're going to here we are going to see 6 principles of the OA process. So here's 4 of them, and the principles 1 through 4, OA as a normative process. So first, you have your person with the internal factors. Then you have the occupational environment, which is the external factors. Then there's an interaction between the internal and external factors, which is the OA process itself. And between what happens after that process is your occupational response. Pretty simple, okay? Not too difficult. All right. Then step 5, during participation, a person may experience a performance breakdown. Okay? So this is where the problem comes in. If you're struggling at that point of participation, it stops. You can't do it. So then the OT has the ability to empower the OA process, and by empower, giving power to, by making the client the agent of change. So again, we are giving the client, teaching them, helping them learn to teach themselves how to be their own agent of change. You as a student, again, if you are studying, you're struggling with one of those things within the environment, either internally or externally, then me as a teacher I'm going to talk you through it, help you problem solve, figure out what's going on, and we're going to come up with a plan together so that you can be an agent of change. You learn how to do that problem solving, so next time something comes up, it's not as hard for you to figure out how to fix it. Okay? So let's try that. So we have the OA constants, right, which were what? The person and the environment. So think about this case. Marco is a 51-year-old truck driver, widower, and father of 3 high school boys. He recently suffered a stroke. This severely impacted his ability to use the right dominant side of his body. Okay, so we have Marco, and he is a 51-year-old truck driver, widower, father of 3 high school boys, and he recently suffered a stroke. So his internal factors probably going to be the stroke. External environmental factors are going to be him being a truck driver, or the occupation is the truck driver. He would he's not going to be able to use his right arm on the right side of his body. He is a widower, so his role is going to be taking care of his 3 high school boys. Okay, let's see. So think of one important role for Marco. What might this person desire to master? Okay, so he needs to master getting his boys to school, maybe. And what might his environment demand mastery from him? And how will the press for mastery manifest? Okay, so what is he going to need to be able to do? We already know his right side is not working. He needs to be able to drive, correct? So potentially he would need to have the right kind of vehicle. He needs to be able to get there on time. The environment itself, the press for mastery is going to be so that he can get his kids to school on time and get back to work. So we have his press for mastery could be his occupational role, um, the role demands, his occupational responses, and his occupational challenges. So his role is father, okay? The role demands would be taking care of his kids, taking them to school. His occupational responses, that's where we're going to have some trouble, right? He's not going to be able to get them to school because he can't drive very well. And the driving very well is his challenge. So what do we see when we look at, or what does he see? What does Marco see when he looks at his adaptation gestalt? So which one of these areas is bigger for him? Is he having more trouble in his psychosocial system, in his cognitive system, or in his sensory motor system? So his gestalt might be more so in his sensory motor system. So it might look a little more, actually, probably a little more like this, right? You may not even have any hardly cognitive system problems. Psychosocial, he probably does because just being able to get the kids to school. Okay, so the gestalt is what does his situation look like in a picture? So the gestalt is the way for the person to configure how to carry out a plan. So what takes up the bigger configuration of the gestalt is the person system that is most deficient. And we decided his was his physical part. So this person system taking up the bigger configuration of the gestalt is said to be overriding the proper configuration of the gestalt. So here's another example. Carson is a smart, active fifth grader who has troubles focusing on a task. He is often fidgety, has a flight of ideas, and cannot stay still. When confronted with tasks that require him to focus, he becomes overwhelmed, emotional, and shuts down easily. Okay, so we have Carson as the person. And then what is his environment areas? We have, it says, so when confronted with tasks that require him to focus. So in his environment, he has to focus. And what is his response? His response is he becomes overwhelmed, emotional, and shuts down easily. So is that a normal response? No, it is not. And the way we know he's having trouble is because he's often fidgety, he has a flight of ideas, and he can't stay still. Okay. Also his challenge or his press for mastery is for him to focus on tasks. Okay. So Carson's adaptation gestalt. Which component would be the point of entry for intervention for him, do you think? Would it be psychosocial, cognitive, or sensory motor? It's going to be sensory motor, right? Because that's where he's having the most trouble focusing. Okay. So how do you measure a person's state of occupational adaptation? So this is principle 4. Occupational adaptation as a normative process and state. So the way we measure it is through adaptive capacity and relative mastery. And this adaptive capacity we've heard before. So measuring the occupational adaptation through effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. So for adaptive capacity, you're going to measure how effective they're able to do their occupation, how efficient it is, and how satisfied they are to do it. How satisfied they are with what they're doing. So that kind of sounds a little bit like the COPM, right? Um, and these are so we need to have, what do we have in our toolbox that can measure these things? And the COPM is one of those. Okay. So here's Luke. Luke is an 8-year-old boy with autism, and he dislikes handwriting. So during school handwriting tasks, Luke is observed to take longer amounts of time. He complains of getting tired easily and unable to complete most written tasks. When prompted by the teacher, Luke shows signs of frustration, cries, and throws his worksheets and pencils. So let's think back to the picture of the OA model. We have Luke and we have school, and his press for mastery is between at school he needs to be able to do handwriting, but he dislikes handwriting. So his internal system automatically starts with poor motivation because he doesn't like it. But why doesn't he like it? Um, or how do we know that he doesn't like it? So we watch him, we're observing him. He takes longer amounts of time. He complains of getting tired, and he's unable to complete most written tasks. Okay. Then the teacher comes in and pushes him or presses him for mastery. And when that press goes on, he shows signs of frustration, crying, and throwing his worksheets and pencils. So his adaptation to the press for mastery here is poor and abnormal, or maladaptive, maladaptive, um, because he's not accomplishing what he's pressed to do. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. All right. So his adaptive capacity is not very much. So does he have enough tools in his toolbox to perform the occupation with mastery and competence? Luke does not. That's why he threw everything. So is he able to respond adaptively in using old or new ways of adapting and evaluating the quality of his or her adaptive response? He did not. He had no way of doing that. So that's when we talked about this in the MOHO. That's when we come in as OT practitioners and help give them some sort of adaptive tool or adaptive response or strategy, teach them when to know that they are becoming frustrated. So we help them see that they're becoming frustrated, and we give them some sort of strategy to bypass that. Okay, so let's assess Luke's adaptive capacity. When faced with a challenging task, such as handwriting, what tools does Luke use to cope with the situation? So his tools were throwing, fussing. He looked unhappy. He just didn't want to do it, said he didn't like it. And do you think that's a sufficient, are those tools sufficient for him? No, not at all. Okay, so relative mastery then. Relative mastery is effectiveness, extent to which desired goal is achieved. So efficiency is the use of time, energy, and resources, and satisfaction is to self and others. Outcomes were personally regarded by self and others. So sometimes they need to realize that what they're doing is not appropriate and not meeting the need of of society or the people that they're around, or it's not appropriate for um, the culture or the environment that they're currently in. Okay. So is Luke able to complete his handwriting tasks? No, he's not. So he did not effectively complete them. Does Luke use his time, energy, and other resources well? No, he does not, because he stops, he gets frustrated. It takes longer than others to do it. And do you think Luke, his teacher, and family are satisfied with his handwriting performance? Most likely not. Okay, so then we have principle 5 and 6, and this is the intervention process. So we've gotten up to, we did the assessment, and now we're going to look at what to do about it. So when a client is in a state of disadaptation, which is what Luke was in, OT can help. OT to the rescue. A state of disadaptation is obvious when the person appears stuck. So kind of like the mouse on the wheel. He just, he does this every single time. You can probably hear yourself saying, why are they fussing? Or maybe your parents said to you, why do you do that? Every single time I tell you to do this, you do blah. So that's because maybe you're stuck doing that. It is limited and improper use of tools in the toolbox. So your goal as an OT is to facilitate development of tools in the toolbox. So if I were to ask you, what is the purpose of OT to the OA model, you would say that the OT is there to facilitate the building of, or the filling of tools in someone's toolbox. And what that means is strategy. You're teaching them strategies or giving them some way of meeting their press or their demand for mastery. So here we go. OT is an intervention. These are the things that we need to remember what how OT is guided by the OA model. So we know we've done a holistic assessment, which we did. We looked at Luke, and then we focus and we focus on reestablishment of occupational roles. So we focus and reestablish. That should not be reestablishment of, but we focus a reestablishment of occupational roles. We need to know what it is that person's roles are, and they need to be able to identify what their roles are. Okay. Then we empower the occupational adaptation process by making the client the agent of change. So we are giving the client what they need to make that adaptive change. We can do that by facilitating the occupational environment. The occupations are central in eliciting adaptive responses. So the occupations themselves, and this is kind of where occupations can come in as the means and the end. So in this model, we are constantly working within that person's specific area of need. So that's one thing that's different about this model and some of the others. We are looking at that specific role, the specific occupation, and we're helping them with it. So when this is this is less overarching than the others are, where we are really focusing in on one task at a time and one strategy at a time with the OA model. Now, that strategy that we're teaching them, it doesn't mean that it won't generalize to something else. But when we're writing our goals and we're using this model, we're going to focus it on that one task. So the bottom line and what we're getting to do, what we're looking to do at the end is to increase their relative mastery and their adaptive capacity. So we're trying to grow their adaptive capacity. So they will have that strategy for that one item, but perhaps it will generalize to other items. Okay. So element 1, it's a holistic assessment. We're going back over these things. Element 2 is focusing on the occupational roles of what their roles are. 3, we are helping that client learn to be their agent of change. We're teaching them how to strategize. We will also facilitate the occupational environment. We can teach them to be an advocate for themselves. Excuse me. We can teach them to be an advocate for themselves and others. We can advocate for them, teach them how to change their environment, maybe their home environment, school environment, work environment, that type of thing. And then we use occupations to elicit adaptive responses. So we work with their occupations while we are in therapy with them to elicit those adaptive responses. We increase their relative mastery. And how do you know it's working? You reassess them and you look for the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the patient and family and whoever else's satisfaction. So hopefully you have built more tools or given them more tools to go in their toolbox. So much so that they need a bigger toolbox. Okay. So use the construct of occupational adaptation. As you provide OT services, which means evaluate and treat, think about your client's current level of occupational adaptation. How well is your client adapting right now? What are they doing? Where are they getting stuck? Look at your therapeutic relationship. What you say, what you don't say, what you do, what you don't do, all of those can facilitate or hinder your client's occupational adaptation process. Make sure you are using the right words and you're not stopping them. Don't just focus on developing specific skills. You will only see your clients for a short period of time. So if you have impacted and facilitated their occupational adaptation process, the benefits of OT may last a very long time. And by teaching them how to adapt to various things should help them adapt to other things in the future. Okay, so hopefully that gets you to where you need to be for the OA model. It's a little, you might need to go back over it. It's not too terribly difficult, but the concepts are kind of a little basic actually, but it's the terminology. So you'll need the terminology for when you're being tested on it. But just remember that this one is more specific to the occupations and the roles that the person is under, and you are trying to teach strategies so that they can carry it out on their own eventually. Okay. Alrighty, sounds like we've got it done, and I guess this is the last model that we will be going over, and now next week we will be looking at frames of reference. I'm looking forward to seeing this presentation, and I think it's going to be really good. I saw the preview. Thank you much.